Amidst the conflict between Israel and Palestine, Britain's Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour wrote a brief letter consisting of 3 paragraphs on November 2, 1917. The letter was directed to Walter Rothschild, the leader of the British Jewish community. In the letter, Balfour predicted that the ongoing dispute would persist for the next century, which was an outcome that the British government may not have foreseen. The cause of the conflict between Israel and Palestine is a controversial topic globally, and I will remain impartial by presenting only facts and figures so that no one can raise any objections. Before World War I, there was peace in Palestine. The majority of the population here were Muslims, but Jews and Christians also lived together peacefully. This entire region was under the control of the Ottoman Empire, which had control over large parts of Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, known as the Ottoman Sultanate. Some Arab leaders were unhappy with Ottoman rule and sought help in secret from the British, who were the Ottomans' enemies. The British promised to help the Arabs gain independence if they assisted in the war against the Ottoman Empire. The same promise was made to the Jews in Europe. The Jews have always been a nation without a definite homeland, considered a minority wherever they lived. In Europe, Jews faced numerous difficulties from the beginning, often viewed with hatred and subjected to violence in many places. A centuries-old religious conflict stemmed from the belief among Christians that the responsibility for the death of Jesus Christ rested upon the Jews. This notion resulted in widespread intolerance towards Jews among Christians in Europe. The inception of the First Zionist Committee, akin to today's NATO, held considerable influence during that era. It championed the cause for the establishment of a distinct state in Palestine. In 1896, a Jewish political activist named Theodor Herzl initiated a movement that aimed to establish a separate country for the Jewish people living in Europe. Herzl published a book named The Jewish State, where he argued that the only way for Jews to live a peaceful life was to have their nation in Palestine. Initially, many Jews opposed this concept, questioning why they should leave their country due to anti-Semitism. But gradually, this movement transformed politically. Jews worldwide started to go to Palestine's cause, and funds were provided for businesses and factories. The British government also promised the European Jews that they would be allowed to establish their own country in Palestine. Fast forward to 1917, during World War I, when the Ottoman Empire was being defeated. In 1917, Arthur Balfour, the Foreign Secretary of Britain, wrote a letter to Walter Rothschild, who was the leader of the Jewish community in Britain. The letter stated that the British government had decided to support the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Rothschild was notified that the British government would provide full support to this effort. This was communicated through a letter on November 2, 1917. It was also mentioned that the Muslims already living there would not be harmed. A month after writing the Balfour Declaration, British soldiers arrived, seized Palestine, and ended the 400-year rule of the Ottoman Empire. The question remains, what did the British government hope to gain by giving the Jews their own country in exchange? In reality, the British only wanted one thing. After the fall of the Ottoman Empire, the establishment of a state in Palestine that could align with them in the future. To achieve this, they made a promise to the Jews that they would be given a separate country. However, in return, they also took a pledge from the Jews that after establishing their own country, they would not abandon the British. Initially, the norm was that the country victorious in war would seize the next country, establishing its rule until it became independent. When World War I was ongoing, Palestine came under British control as part of the post-war plan. They made vigorous efforts to establish Jewish colonies there and succeeded. The Arabs living in Palestine claimed that the British did not seek their opinion before granting them freedom. In 1919, Arthur Balfour wrote a memorandum stating that there was no need to ask the Arab inhabitants already living in Palestine about its borders. The Palestinians felt that the British were too lenient towards Jewish people in their laws. A wave of Jewish immigrants from around the world began in Palestine. They built schools, opened factories, and even formed a small army called the Haganah, all with the approval of the British. According to Palestinian Arabs, there was no option but to accept that the British were not working for our freedom, but were rather giving our land to others. For years, they endured this situation. But in 1939, the Arab population began to voice their discontent. However, the Arabs were met with severe consequences for raising their voice against the British. Some leaders were expelled from Palestine, and others faced execution. Yet, the Palestinian Arabs did not give up their struggle. To resolve the matter, the British government established a commission. This commission proposed a solution that Palestine should be divided into 2 parts. However, The Arabs of Palestine did not accept this solution because fundamentally, they disagreed with the idea of why Palestine was being divided. The strike persisted until 1939 when the British government put forth a policy known as the White Paper. This policy considered the situation in Palestine over the past 2 decades. Within this policy, the Peel Commission, which had ended the Arab strike, was initially rejected. Furthermore, strict limitations were placed on new Jewish immigrants to Palestine, and existing Jewish residents were banned from purchasing Arab-owned land. It was also decided that within the next 10 years, an independent state would be established in Palestine, serving as a homeland for the Jewish people. Overall, the White Paper proved to be highly deceitful. This White Paper created the term Zionist-Arab conflict for the first time. The Arabs rejected the White Paper, and attacks on the British government began throughout Palestine, leading to the deaths of several local Palestinians. These attacks continued for months, but eventually reached a turning point. In 1939, World War II began. While this war claimed the lives of 6 million people worldwide, Hitler, during this time, ruthlessly killed 600,000 European Jews in his death camps. This period is known as the Holocaust, which occurred between 1941 and 1945. Hitler also killed 660,000 Jews living in Europe. Apart from surviving Jews having no option but to escape to Palestine, there was no other choice. For them, it was a holy place, and besides, there was already a Jewish community. Despite immigration limitations imposed by the British government, migration to Palestine began. However, conditions in Palestine were far from ideal. The Zionist-British conflict was still ongoing, with the White Paper being contested. After the Second World War, the British were still struggling and lacked the zeal to fight the Zionists. Given the circumstances, they decided to withdraw in 1947, leaving the unresolved issue of Palestine in the hands of the United Nations. At that time, the population in Palestine comprised 630,000 Jews, 143,000 Christians, and 1,181,000 Muslims, based on research by Italian demographer Sergio della Pergola. Interestingly, the number of Muslims had doubled due to Jewish immigration. However, the United Nations did not provide any elucidation as to why they granted only 30% of the land to 55% of the Jews. At that time, the UN Assembly also had India's representation, and India voted against this decision. India's Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, raised concerns, stating that the Indian ambassador to the UN had been offered bribes by the Zionists to vote in favor of them. He urged that the vote be invalidated, but the UN did not provide any explanation. All Arab countries rejected the resolution, and Zionists and Palestinians came face to face. Fighting broke out between the two sides, but the Jewish military was considerably stronger. Palestinians could not withstand their power, and in 1948, the Declaration of the State of Israel was officially announced. David Ben-Gurion. They were the first prime ministers of Israel. In 1948, all Arab countries collectively decided to launch an attack on Israel. First of all, they had already opposed it in the UN, and secondly, they believed that this was a new strategy used by the British to keep control of their nation. In this, the first Arab-Israeli conflict, Israel was attacked by a number of Arab nations working together. It happened only a few months following Palestine's separation. But Israel had the backing of Western nations, and those nations did possess a sizable military. As a result, Israel also gained power over the UN after the war, since it had designated some regions for Palestine. The West Bank, hitherto under Jordanian jurisdiction, succumbed to the control of Israel. In 1967, another Arab-Israeli war occurred, and Israel not only seized the West Bank, but also the Gaza Strip and the entire Sinai Peninsula. Amidst all this, the Palestinian people wanted to establish their own country, leading to the formation of an organization called the PLO, which stands for the Palestine Liberation Organization. Initially, they tried to declare independence by force, with Yasser Arafat leading the way. Several attempts were made, with support from the US and Israel, Yasser Arafat as the leader of a terrorist organization. However, many countries did not consider him a terrorist. They saw him as a revolutionary who wanted to create his own nation. In 1974, the United Nations officially recognized the PLO because they represented the Palestinian people. Subsequently, in 1979, peace talks between Egypt and Israel succeeded, making Egypt the first Arab country to officially recognize Israel. In response, Israel returned the Sinai Peninsula to them. However, 2 years later, Egypt, the prime minister, was assassinated by extremist groups, revealing the challenges of negotiating with Israel. Due to Israel's prolonged occupation, many settlements began to emerge in the West Bank. However, the international community objected, as it went against the 1947 UN partition plan. The West Bank area was initially designated for Palestine, but Israel seized control and started building homes for its people. In 1992, peace talks between Israel and the PLO resumed. PLO leader Yasser Arafat and Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin recognized each other, acknowledging that the PLO is not a terrorist organization. During this period, internal divisions arose within the PLO. One faction, known as Hamas, opposed any compromise with Israel. Simultaneously, an extremist group in Israel argued against making any concessions with Palestine. Nevertheless, peace talks continued between Israel and the PLO, with both sides attempting to resolve the issue. The challenge remained as Israeli settlements in the West Bank, established over time, complicated the solution. Eventually, a solution emerged in which the West Bank would be divided into 3 parts: Area A and Area B under Palestinian control, and Area C under Israeli control. This resolution deviated significantly from the 1947 UN partition plan, where Palestine was only allocated a small portion of the West Bank to govern. Even though other Palestinians accepted this, the extremist group disrupted the peace process in 1995 by assassinating their own prime minister. They never wanted any Palestinians around the West Bank at any cost. In 1996, the inaugural elections in Palestine transpired, culminating in the formation of the first governmental body. Nevertheless, this development drew disapproval from Hamas, a militant Palestinian faction. Their discontent not only manifested in the rejection of the electoral outcomes, but also materialized through a series of suicide bombings in Israel, intensifying the already strained relations between Israelis and Palestinians. After these tumultuous events, hostilities between Israel and Palestine endured. In response, Israel erected formidable concrete barriers around its settlements in the West Bank, aiming to impede Palestinian habitation. The year 2006 witnessed a renewed electoral process in Palestine, with Hamas prevailing on this occasion. This triumph triggered a power struggle between Fatah, under the leadership of Arafat, and Hamas, ultimately resulting in the partition of Palestine into 2 distinct entities. Today, Hamas holds control over the Gaza Strip, and the West Bank is governed by the Palestinian Authority, Fatah. Most conflicts between Israel and Hamas occur in Gaza, where rockets are frequently fired towards Israel. As a response, Israel has tightened its grip on the Gaza Strip, erecting a significant fence. Every few years, tensions escalate and conflicts between Hamas and Israel intensify. The last major escalation occurred in 2021, and now, on October 7, 2023, Hamas has fired more than 5,000 rockets towards Israel. This ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine has taken different forms over the past 100 years, continually reminding us of their enduring presence. I have approached this topic with great caution, avoiding targeting any religion and presenting only facts and figures. Please share your thoughts on this topic in the comments section. See you in the next video.